It surrounds us. It's everywhere. Tonight, you will hear from the people who live and work within these highly active locations, all in the efforts to discover America's most haunted. With your host, ghost hunter and author, Dan Terry.
Merry Christmas, ghosts and Grinches. I am Dan Terry, your ghost host with the most haunted. Just want to start right out by saying, on behalf of myself and my producer, Race, and our boss, Margie, Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a Happy New Year. We're going to do a little bit different show tonight. You guys know I'm big on the ghost thing. I don't believe there are demons, no doubt, but I don't think they're very prevalent. They're very, very extremely rare. Well, my guest is the same way about ghosts. Eric Extreme is a paranormal investigator, not a ghost hunter. There is a difference, and he's going to be discussing that a little bit. He's the founder and director of Mount Washington Valley Spirit, which is scientific paranormal investigation, research, and interpretation team. All right. Hey, guys, don't forget, we're coming in live tonight, so pop up those remarks if you've got any. Eric is not saying that there are no ghosts, there are no paranormal activity. What he says is it's pretty rare, and he can almost always find a scientific reason to explain the activity or the perceived activity. You guys know, and you've watched me long enough, when Tim Clifton is on here or Dr. Farley from St. Louis Paranormal's on here, some of the others, we can disagree without getting angry and arguing. And I want you to keep that in mind if you start putting up some of these comments. No need to fight. We're all in this together. We all see things from a different point of view. So let me bring in Eric Extreme, a paranormal investigator. Hey, Eric.
Hey, Dan. How you doing today?
Oh, not bad. Merry Christmas. And I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your stories of finding out this wasn't a ghost. You and I talked before. A couple of times I've had those where it was extremely high EMF, or something else, even some mental illness. One time I had a hotel call me in because the ghost stood by the same corner of the same bed every night. And when I got in there with the K2 meter and really checked it out, it was the Dollar General brand alarm clock causing high EMF, which caused a lot of the issues. So what have you dealt with? What have you seen like this?
All right. Well, I'll tell you about my latest case,
Sure.
actually. There's a local elderly woman who lives in the next town over from me. She was starting to experience various symptoms. It included headaches, earaches, unexplained anxiety. She wasn't typically an anxious person. She was having some sleeplessness and something called scopistasia. That's the feeling of being watched.
Okay.
So she wanted to remain somewhat anonymous because of the stigma. You know, people, we're in a outback where we live up here in the mountains of New Hampshire, so it's kind of I don't want to say reserved, but people tend to a little more on the down low with this sort of thing
Sure.
when it's involving them. Not that there aren't haunted places everywhere around here. There's a lot of history around here. But anyway, so she reached out to a couple ghost hunting teams from out of town. And, you know, they were the type of teams that kind of just followed what they saw on television, you know, not a lot of experience. They did some consulting with her and pretty much found 8,000 reasons why the place was haunted, not really getting into any of the science behind it, which is what I do.
Okay.
She wasn't convinced. She thought maybe there was more to it. And so she reached out on a local Facebook page, actually asking if there was someone in the region that, you know, had a little more of a scientific mind with this. Some people were suggested there's a ghost hunting team in town, but they would have fallen into that same category.
Hmm.
First team that consulted her. So some people suggested me, and they put me in contact with her. And honestly, I didn't even need to go there to figure out what was going on. I conducted an interview with her, and what really cued me in is when she mentioned that she was having ear pain and headaches. So I just got to know her a little bit for a couple minutes, and then I started asking questions pertaining to infrasound. What infrasound is are sound frequencies below 20 hertz. Humans can hear typically the range is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Some humans can hear down to 17 to 18 hertz, but it's not common. The human eye resonates at 18 hertz, which I'll get into in a moment.
Okay.
So I started asking her various questions. What can cause infrasound is things with spinning motors, dryers, fans, generators, any type of motor, basically. Natural forms will actually come from tectonic plates, volcanoes, thunder. And another form of thunder is Schumann resonances. That's a whole different thing to get into. Some animals use infrasound for contacting in large packs like elephants or rhinoceros. The sound can actually
Really?
travel. Yeah, it can actually travel hundreds of miles. These large packs that are traveling will actually use this. So anyway, I started asking her, I'm like, do you happen to, have a diesel generator? Because a lot of houses up here in the woods have generators.
Hmm.
And she goes, no, no, I'm on the grid and I don't have a generator. I says, well, do you happen to have an old dryer? And she goes, no, no, no. I actually live in a condo. I use a local laundromat. And I says, "Do you happen to have an old metallic fan?" And she stops and she's like, "Actually, yes, I do." She says, "I use this old metallic fan because in her condo the air circulation isn't very good. So she
Hmm.
keeps it near some of the heat vents so it blows heat and across a larger room. And in the summer the same thing with the air conditioning." And I said, "Well, has this thing started sounding a little awkward lately? Is there any type of grinding noise or like it's having a little difficulty?" And she's like, "Yeah, actually, it has." And I suggested that this was creating a level of infrasound and that she may be sensitive to this. I said, let's do an experiment. Let's turn off the fan or replace it. Because large fans aren't overly expensive, and if she owns a condo, she's got some money. But that wouldn't exactly explain the scopastasia, the feeling of being watched. So I dug a little deeper into that. And so I started asking questions related to whether she had been doing some remodeling in the house and whatnot. She goes, "No, I haven't done any remodeling." I says, "Well, have you been, any of the rooms that you're used to the look of? Is there any difference? Have you been moving some stuff around? Have you been cleaning out closets or packing?" She goes, "Actually, yeah, I have a big walk-in closet that I've been cleaning out for the past couple weeks." She goes, "I have boxes stacked everywhere in my bedroom." I says, "Well, are you familiar with something called claustrophobia? The fear of enclosed spaces."
Hmm.
And I felt by having these stacks of boxes around, it had changed the atmosphere in her smaller bedroom. It's a small condo, and it changes the light patterns. And she goes, "Actually, come to think of it, I'm feeling this when I'm going to bed at night." It says, "Well, over the next couple days, if you can, lower the levels of the boxes or get them back in the closet because I feel that it might be acute claustrophobia, not scopastasia, from a paranormal entity." So over the next couple days, she replaced the fan and she cleaned up the room. And sure enough, we heard back from her a couple days later that all the symptoms from headaches to ear pain to the feeling of being watched, the anxiety, sleeplessness, all disappeared. And it turns out where, some ghost hunters convinced her that try to convince her her place was haunted. It was just infrasound and acute claustrophobia.
And that is incredible. You was able to set this woman's mind at ease and solve the problem over the phone.
Yep.
Uh, why do these groups, and I've been part of them and all that, but if we didn't find anything, we didn't find anything. Why are they so quick to cling on to this stuff? Did they get K2 readings? Did they get pictures of something besides dust orbs? Something.
Well, let's take a little nod back into history. Prior to 15 years ago, you'll find a lot of the paranormal investigators were scientists.
Hmm.
They worked for colleges, or they had financial backing through scientific organizations, and they were doing real scientific work. And then there were your ghost hunters. They were two completely separate things. About 15 years ago, a couple of the people who I've worked with, and I will get into that, from ghost hunters, and they started this TV show craze.
Hmm.
And for it was run by Pilgrim, that's their production company. And what sounds better, claiming you're a paranormal investigator or a ghost hunter? So they named it Ghost Hunters, but they referred to themselves as paranormal investigators in doing a paranormal investigation. And a lot of shows, I couldn't even count how many shows came on after that.
Yeah.
But basically, the spooky to the general public is a lot more fun than the science. The science takes a lot more time to learn, and you really got to want to do it. It's not something, hey, I'm going to learn it, and most people are going to forget about it 5 minutes later. I mean, how much
Hmm.
stuff from school do you actually remember? Any of this stuff that exactly. So people are using these TV shows as a template, and what people need to understand is these TV shows are not paranormal investigations. They're literally ghost hunts that are designed to bring in the most viewers. They don't represent a real paranormal investigation. They're designed to just have more people watch, make more money for the advert,
Hmm.
the TV networks. No one's going to sit there and regularly watch a TV show if they're sciencing the heck out of something. You get a small niche audience. But something like what I do, and those who do what I do, it would make a good an hour and a half, 2 hour long documentary on the Science Network, but it's not something that people are going to tune in weekly for. So here we have, for the past 15 years, we have all these TV shows of ghost hunting referencing themselves as paranormal investigators when honestly they're not. And I've worked with these guys. I like them. They're nice guys. To some extent, they do get frustrated because they do have more of a scientific mind. Years ago, when Ghost Hunters was in its first several seasons, actually,
Hmm.
between seasons, some of the guys would run these weekend long symposiums around the New England area because most of them were based out of Connecticut. So
Right.
they kept it local, somewhat close to home, keeps down the expenses. It wasn't an official event put on by the television show itself. They were allowed to use the name, but it was basically a side hustle for some of these guys. Primarily a couple of them. I won't drop names here because some of them may be watching. Um,
Boy,
but
that
I
would be
went,
nice to think.
yeah. But I actually went to one of these events as a paid spectator.
Okay.
And I went there with one of the gentlemen from my team when I was down in Massachusetts at the time. It's where I first got into this. And we were off doing an experiment with sound in one of the corners. This was at the Rolling Hills Asylum up in New York.
Hmm.
And Barry Fitzgerald, the lead investigator from GHI, was one of the guys there. And he comes over and he says, "Hey, you guys, what are you guys up to?" And we explained to him what we're doing. We're trying some experiments with sound. And he goes, we're kind of short staffed and we're busy. You guys seem to really know what you're talking about. Do you want to lead some investigations for us tonight? I'm like, duh. Who's gonna say no to that, right? These are the guys
Right.
we've been watching on TV. So I actually got involved with them for a period of time, leading events, non-televised events. It was
Hmm.
me and one of my buddies from the group, and then they brought in a couple other people who were like me with more of a scientific background, and we were actually teaching some of the science at these events. So people were getting both sides. The Ghost Hunters people were doing their cinematic version, and then they were getting the science side too, because they wanted people to be able to see both sides of it to try and get a more balanced thing going on. But some of the guys stepped back from leading it, and it kind of handed it over to one person. I won't drop his name here; it wouldn't be appropriate. But he really, really was hardcore about the cinematic version, and he pulled a
Hmm.
couple of us aside. And he's like, I'd really like you guys to do more of what we're doing. We want to make more money off of this. This is a side hustle. I'm like, look, we can do both. We have our reputations of our own that we want to keep, and we're trying to be on the scientific side of things. And to
Hmm.
do that, you get, it's kind of hard to mix in too much of the other half. But anyway, I was actually doing a class about some of the electronics and how some of it's not particularly useful. And this guy walks in, from the show, and oh my God, look at this. The lights are going off, and everyone starts laughing because I just spoke for 15 minutes about how this may not have been a real reliable device. So he and I had another discussion afterwards, and he pretty much said, "This is what you guys are going to be doing." And we said, "No, we're not." So a bunch of us left when we stopped doing these events. And unfortunately, these events pretty much stopped being run by this one particular person very soon thereafter because no one would work for him because we wanted to have a more balanced, education going on. But
Didn't some of these groups, and one in particular, I remember some of their own people were saying, no, we faked a lot of this stuff. And I remember one, they actually went through some of it showing what they had faked.
yeah, well, I remember one episode in particular. Ghost Hunters was doing a live episode, and somehow the audio feed got crossed from the producer onto the live show, and you could hear him telling one of the cast members, "Hey, look as if you saw something off to the side." And the cast member's like, "I'm not doing that," and he used a four-letter word while doing so, and they realized that the audio had gotten in there. But speaking to these guys, they weren't lying; they were just very much being theatrical with things, because that's what
Okay.
people were tuning in for. Some of these people I still keep in contact with, like Barry Fitzgerald's one of them. He's really, really into the science like I am, but he's also on like the other side of things where,
Yeah.
he's from the UK. They have a longer history than we do here. It goes, centuries and centuries and millennia longer. So he does these events at these old castles that date back who knows how many years. So
hmm
he's more well-rounded. I'm definitely more scientific, but he's right down the middle where he's on both sides of. But he's over the years he's included me in some of his scientific studies that are being done with a college over there.
Okay.
So I enjoy that part of it.
I remember an episode of one of the shows in which they were in a prison, and it actually looked like a guy with a sheet on that turned around and ran. And when they stopped it, I swear those were Italian made tennis shoes he was wearing. Just there was so much happened there towards the end that honestly they lost a lot of their what I realism.
Yeah, they lost some credibility.
Yeah, that's the word.
Um, it wasn't the decisions of the team members themselves. They
Mhm.
were being pressured by the production company. Because I know some of these guys, they've been straightforward with me. It's like, look, we're here to make a paycheck, but we want to keep it somewhat realistic.
Mhm.
But they still have bosses that they have to answer to, the production company.
Their early episodes, maybe 1 in 3 or less was haunted. Most of them they found some kind of scientific answer
Yeah.
to. And then after about the first half season, maybe first season, now every place is haunted.
Yeah, if you remember, they used to have a lot of guests on the show who would bring in like infrasound analyzers and
Mhm.
ultrasound analyzers, all this different equipment that I actually use. But the production company kind of put a stop to that. They wanted more ratings, and for the ratings, it was the spooky because there were these other TV shows coming on, and their ratings were going up with the level of spookiness going up, and the ghost hunters weren't following the same, so they went the other direction with it. I know
Mhm.
Jason and his has some say in it, so he tries to find somewhat of a balance. So if you watch more older season, the newer
Right.
seasons of it, it's a little more down to earth.
Okay.
Now that he has a little more authority in it, it's but it's still not the most scientific thing, because like I said, no one's gonna watch it. you
Yeah,
know
and that's true, and I have no problem with showmanship, but some of it just absolutely come out looking like trickery,
oh, absolutely.
and very poor trickery at that, so,
Yeah, a lot of heavy editing was
yeah.
being done. It's not if you could tell the difference between when they were shooting things live versus the highly edited, the spooky music in the background. Um, the special effects that they tend to work
Mhm.
in there while they're telling their story. I mean, it's TV, But,
Yeah.
what I tell everyone is don't use the TV shows as your education on how to complete an investigation. It's best to find a well-tenured, group who, they don't have to be as scientific as I am. I'm really on the far end of the spectrum with that, but someone, a group that's more balanced, that does a little bit of both,
Hmm.
because, there's some groups that go in there with such a bias that everything's spooky, everything's paranormal. And, even on some of the TV shows I'm watching, and I'm like, I can tell you exactly what that is. I can see it, you know, but to
Yeah.
them, it's
Yeah.
all spooky because that's what's going to draw in the most viewers. So it is what it is. But I just recommend to people, don't use that. Don't use the TV shows
Right.
on for education purposes.
Well, I have went into places and found nothing. I remember one in particular. The lady kept the stories she was telling kept getting stronger and stronger. Her son was right there with her. We found absolutely nothing. And the husband and daughter says, yeah, none of that happened. So I'm dealing with probable mental illness here. What do you do? Because I can't prove or disprove. I just said there's nothing I can do. I can't find anything. She found some other group to come in and tell her what she wanted to hear.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people in this field, they don't take the time to get some basic human behavioral education into their noggins. And what anytime I do any of these talks, or I'm training people, or I answer questions online, I always tell them, if there is even the slightest hint that there might be some mental illness in play, you need to vacate. You do not take on that case. um, a lot of the times people are on various types of medications, and those
Yes.
medications alone can cause all various sorts of hallucinations, various forms of pareidolia. Pareidolia meaning, your body trying to make sense out of confusion. It'll
Hmm.
take the most mundane things and you'll perceive it in a completely different way, and it can be visual, audible, or tactile. So, when I'm interviewing someone, if I get the slightest hint that they have some sort of mental illness, and I ask everyone, what medications are you on? I've been a certified pharmacy technician for 15 years, so I'm quite familiar with a lot of medications. So they
Hmm.
can just name off medications, and for the most part, I know what they're for. And if they're on a series of medications that have the possibility of altering perception, it's a red flag to me. And
Sure.
then you got to take that into account when they're telling their spooky stories, because for all you know, these medications are what causing those perceptions.
Very likely. But also, I have dealt with cases in which their mental illness drew spirits to them. So I mean, I've dealt with real spirits, even though
Yep.
this woman was not all there once or twice. Tell me
Yeah.
about, oh, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, often you get this phenomenon, and I've seen it myself. One of the few spooky things that I'm willing to say I saw is, you get what could be referred to as like a thought form or poltergeist. It's someone
Yeah.
who's extremely emotional. They Their energy almost takes on a mind of its own. It's not like a coherent person or anything like that. Quick story. I was doing a case down in Massachusetts, like, oh my god, 13, 14 years ago, and it was this young lady swearing up and down that there was all this kind of activity going on, and she was perceiving it. And to make a long story short, basically she had this bedroom filled of quartz. And as you know, there's the theory called the stone tape theory, which is where stones can absorb and re-radiate energy over time.
Hmm.
And, it's like United States drops an atomic bomb somewhere, it re-radiates energy for hundreds of years. You can't go anywhere near the place. An old pizza brick oven, you light the fire, and, the bricks get warm, and they'll stay warm for who knows how long afterwards. But, with stuff like limestone and like quartz crystal, they can absorb and in some cases amplify and re-radiate this energy. So this young lady was really, really emotional. She was going through a real tough time in her life, horrendously anxious, levels of depression. So I go into this house, and she was claiming all this activity, and her family was, confirming some of it. And to keep a long story short, I basically came to the conclusion that all this crystal that was in her home was absorbing and re-rating her own energy. So as she's putting off energy, there's more of it coming from. She had hundreds and hundreds of pieces of crystal in this room. It almost looked like a rock cave. She had so much in there. But this EMF soup that was being caused by her and these stones almost took on a life of their own, where it was causing so much pareidolia in the house.
Mm-hmm.
That I could explain with, pareidolia, but there were things that I could not prove with science. Like, they were talking about hearing sounds. And there's stuff called like musical ear syndrome. That's when you hear music that's not really there, in this forms of ear-barotrauma. But I scienced the heck out of it, but to some extent, I felt that there was something going on there, and I believed it was more of a manifestation of her own energy that was just so strong that it was not like consciously causing things to happen, but it was just so much energy there that it was causing things to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So she basically cleared all this crystal out of the room and got some needed assistance for her mental status.
Sure.
And I still talk to her now and again. She's still a bit of a emotional person, but when you're younger, your metabolism, your hormones are a lot different, and as you get older, in general, you through life's experience, you gain some control over it, some coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
So all that additional activity is long gone for her, but we still talk about it every now and again. It's fun to talk about.
But she took your advice and the problem ceased.
The amplification effect of having the stones there ceased.
Okay.
With her still being emotional, that means your nervous system can be hyperactive. You're still going to have your own form of pareidolia. You're still creating this energetic soup around you, and your body, not understanding it, is going to try and make sense of it. So she still felt scopesthesia, the feeling of being watched. She still felt that there was things going on. But I think part of that, to some extent, was she was still really having difficulty dealing with her, emotional state at the time. But I didn't go back in there after that because, I was still newer to the field, but I didn't want to get too involved because of her emotional state, because you don't want to be the trigger to make things worse. So I explained what I could with science, gave her some suggestions, and got out of there. But that it was kind of a teaching moment for me on to be really careful with people who are struggling with emotions or mental illness, because you don't want to throw fuel on that fire. Things can happen. I've seen, I used to work up at the hospital in down in Worcester, Massachusetts, when I lived down there, and they had a mental ward, and there was multiple times that people were in there claiming about all these, I used to bring food up there. I work for food service, and people would tell me all these stories of these hauntings, and people were coming in to try and confirm them. And I realized back then that you can't, you got to keep away.
Okay. Back in the 70s, when I started on this journey, there was a theory that younger girls just reaching that age where their hormones are kicking in, if they had a lot of energy, would actually whirlpool outward from them and cause what people consider to be poltergeist activity. Is that still an accurate theory?
Scientifically, I can't confirm it scientifically, but it is still quite active. There's two different levels. There's what's known as a thought form, and then there is the poltergeist. A poltergeist basically translates to noisy spirit. That's a thought form is almost where they're perceiving, or an investigator may find activity that's very low key, but it's definitely not explainable with science. And then you get into the poltergeist activity, where it's much more prevalent, much more noisy spirit. I don't come across it very often anymore. And I find much of that, I'm sure, is because if someone seems to have some sort of emotional difficulty, I kind of back away and recommend a more um, typical
Start with the
medical
medical.
assistance. Yeah.
Mhm.
And once that gets taken care of, then I'd be more willing, but I'm not causing more trouble than, you know.
And I think you just hit the key on that, because if this is not real, you're causing more issues with these poor people than when you tell them, "Hey, this isn't real. You need
Oh yeah.
help."
I remember one time, I knew some people from the hospital because I had worked there, and I actually hung out with a bunch of them for many years afterwards. But there was one incident where, someone who I knew who worked up, it was the 8th floor, is the mental ward. They called me and told me that they had a patient who was claiming that they felt like they were being watched, that their cabinets were opening on their own, and this person was had such a high level of anxiety, they checked themselves in to emergency mental health. And because of the stories they were telling, and the person who was, listening to these stories, the kind of a caseworker, uh remanded them to the mental ward, at least on a temporary, because the stories that were being told were kind of out there.
Mhm.
So, this person from the hospital called me and said, "Look, I shouldn't even be calling you, but I know you and I trust you." He said, "This is what the person's telling me. What do you think?" And I says, "I have an idea what the cause would be, but we would have to find the cause. And I guess, it would probably be some level of high EMF." So this person was in there. They did a 7-day watch on the person. The person wasn't going to hurt themselves. They sent them home with some anxiety meds. So I was willing to go in there since they were receiving, care that they needed, and it was kind of a favor to the person at the hospital. So I wasn't even there very long. Basically, um, I went in there and just with a simple EMF meter, because I figured that's what was causing this. They had all the symptoms of it. And first, I looked into the cabinets, and these cabinets had these small magnetic locks on it. And as I'm sure you're aware, how do you overpower magnet with stronger EMF?
Mhm.
So I looked for the source of this EMF, and it turned out right outside this person's bedroom. And this is where most of their perceived activity was happening. There was one of those transformers up on an electric pole that was right outside their window, but the box on it was missing part of the shielding. So her bedroom was getting flooded with extremely high levels of EMF. So we called the electric company, and they came over and they fixed it. And just like someone flipped a switch, the EMF was gone, and the cabinet stopped opening, and her symptoms went away. So this person who, before they even had gone to this hospital, they had called in a local ghost hunter team who confirmed to her that the place was haunted.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, this woman, obviously you didn't want to get involved with that, but they did. But thankfully I was put in the position to, kind of fix it. And it took her quite a bit of time to feel comfortable again, because long-term EMF exposure can really do a number on you,
Sure.
both physically and mentally. So she continued to get some mental health assistance after that. But, long term, she was fine. It was just an unshielded transformer outside her window that caused her to believe that, she was being visited by evil spirits.
I am surprised though that EMF could come that strong from a typical transformer or whatever.
Yeah, this pole was literally within a couple feet of her bedroom window, and the
Okay.
shield, the whole back side of this, how they have the metal boxes with some shielding on it,
Mhm.
it was completely gone on one side, and it was a side literally a couple feet from her bedroom window, and right at her bedroom window is where she slept. So we're talking, she was within, maybe 5, 6 feet of this darn thing.
Mhm.
So that's why, typically it fades off pretty quickly. But the cabinets were very close by too. So it was just the perfect set of circumstances where this was happening.
Well, I remember that high EMF can cause paranoia,
Yep.
feelings of being watched. I had never heard that they could overpower a magnet like that.
You would be surprised what they can do. The magnets were not strong magnets. They were just the most minutely tiny magnets just to keep the cabinets from popping open. They're the type of magnets that you would see on, like, one of those markers for a whiteboard. I mean, they were tiny, tiny little things
Okay.
that, I mean, you could flick it with your finger and it would bounce right open. So it didn't take much. They weren't strong magnets by any stretch of the imagination, but when they mentioned the magnets, that would clue me in on to probable EMF.
Mhm. You mentioned something earlier about music. I remember I could hear music coming from the fan. It almost sounded like 40s swing music. And yet I know there was nothing, there was no ghost there. What causes that?
It can be one of two things, actually. There's musical ear syndrome, which is almost a form of pareidolia.
Hmm.
You're what's more common to us than seeing human figures or hearing music? I mean, it's ingrained in us. How many of us just listen to music almost daily, whether it's
I
for
do.
fitness or while cleaning or in the car? So when your mind's trying to make sense out of confusion, it's gonna there's a part of your brain called the fusiform. It's what tries to make sense out of chaos for us. So your mind's gonna lean on what's most familiar to you, and that's why you see forms or you'll hear music or even hear whispering of voices. But then there is the possibility, it doesn't take a heck of a lot for some objects to start reverberating a bit if they're receiving radio signals. I mean, if you're in a city or even a decent sized town, there's radio towers everywhere.
There is,
Um,
yes.
there's also, especially with AM radio, there's a phenomenon known as ionospheric radio wave propagation. And to briefly get into that science, basically what happens is a radiation from the sun causes our ionosphere, which is a layer of the atmosphere. It starts around 60 miles up. It separates the protons from the electrons. And what happens is it becomes a mirror to low band radio signals. And there's no lower band radio signals like AM radio. That's really low.
Hmm.
So you can actually get signals from thousands or even 10,000 miles away that come in, bounce off the atmosphere like 60 miles above you, come right back down and have full power as if almost you're right next to the transmitter. So
Okay.
you could honestly hear, and I've seen it happen before, like even in a washing machine, I came across it once. They were getting in a radio signal from a station that was something like 2,500 miles away, and it
Yeah.
was due to this ionospheric radio wave propagation. Now, it can also happen with a form that's called tropospheric ducting. It happens more so to higher radio frequencies. The ionospheric propagation is typically below 30 megahertz. Tropospheric ducting can happen up to a couple hundred megahertz, and it includes the FM radio band. And what that is radio signals can get caught in between hot and cold air in our troposphere, and it actually becomes a funnel or duct for radio signals. And it's limited. It's not like ionospheric propagation could be worldwide, but this tropospheric ducting is typically limited to a couple hundred miles at most.
Okay.
So you could be, say, in New York and pick up, some FM radio signal from New Hampshire and hear it in the speakers of like your computer, or if you have a fan going, that some of the older ones that are really metallic, you may start hearing almost like the bass of a speaker. It's kind of funny that when it happens, but it can happen, and it doesn't have to even be something local.
I think I'll have to give mine to the pareidolia because I guess it sounded to me almost like a 40s type of music,
Yeah.
but I know it wasn't real. It couldn't
Mhm.
possibly be real, but I would hear it every few days. So I guess it's just something about my brain at that moment was trying to make something out of the noise.
Yeah, in layman's terms, it's called an earworm. It's kind of like when you can't get a song out of your head and
Hmm.
you literally think you're hearing it. I mean, and it's just a song stuck in your head.
Hmm.
But sometimes, we have, as humans, we have this interesting memory where we can forget about something for years or even decades. And then all of a sudden we'll have this old memory or this old song pop back in our head, but we don't
Right.
remember it. We don't actually remember ever hearing it, but there's part of our brain that remembers it. So you'll have this musical ear syndrome where you're hearing these old songs that you may have heard decades ago and you've long forgotten about. But to you, they seem like a song that you've never heard before,
Hmm.
and I've had cases over the years of paranormal activity where this has occurred where it's just, a forgotten memory.
I love the way you bring the stuff in, the true scientific theories to explain what's going on,
Mhm.
because that's the whole point of trying to help people. Is it paranormal, or is it something we can fix by getting a new fan?
Oh, exactly. And I don't want to say there isn't paranormal. I've had my experiences, and we haven't even talked about a few of those yet.
Mhm.
However, to me, like, I believe you were a police investigator, right?
35 years, yes.
Exactly. So you'll understand when I say you can go in with some idea of what's going on, but if you're going to court with something, you need your ducks in a row. You need your
Oh,
evidence.
yeah.
And you know, you may have an idea of where it's leading and you may not. But for me, you know, how can I consider something to be paranormal if I haven't made great efforts to rule out the normal?
Mhm.
And while I have, you know, a pretty decent level of scientific knowledge, I never went to college. I actually have a learning disability. I had to go
Mm.
to a special high school where it was project based. Instead of sitting in a classroom, we went out and learned hands on at various companies and organizations in the area that were involved with what we were learning.
Wow.
But so I didn't go to college, but I have involved with science for so long that I have a lot of friends with extra letters at the end of their last name because they have PhDs and master's degrees. So I have my own little network of people that I consult with. You know, I've had a physicist, a geologist, even a home builder, people, a medical doctor, a psychiatrist. You know, people who have that extra knowledge. And I'll tell you, most of them don't even know that I'm doing this for the paranormal thing. They think I'm just bouncing random questions off of them because they know I have a mind that likes to churn out weird ideas, and that's what most of them think, except for a
Mhm.
couple who do know what I'm doing. You know, so even if something I can't explain with science, I go to the subject matter experts as another level of science, and if they can't do it, then I'll lean towards a possible paranormal cause. But I'm only willing to do that if I've ruled out the science, because like I said, how can I go towards paranormal if I haven't explored all the normal first?
And that's the way we used to do it. That was the way it was done back in the late 70s,
Yep.
early 80s. That was awesome. And then I joined the military, had to quit because they thought I was crazy. All right, you brought it up. Tell us one of the stories that really was something you could not find a reason for.
There's one that really stands out in particular. It was at one of the events that I was doing with, it was primarily Ghost Hunters International, which was their version run by Barry Fitzgerald.
Mhm.
That was done out of primarily the United Kingdom and countries around there. So we're doing an event, and we were doing a class on different methods you've seen on TV for spirit communication or
Yes.
attempt at spirit communication, various devices that were used, and it was all verbal. We didn't have any real devices there. And so I'm sitting on the floor in the middle of the room. I'd been on my feet for hours. I just wanted to sit, and there was more people than seats. So I was sitting, and then I had about 15 people around me, and then Barry was off to the side a little bit. And we're discussing different ways of, you know, potentially making contact. And all of a sudden we hear a raspy voice. At first, I figured, you know, maybe there was some speakers in the room. It was maybe someone in the next room over. So he popped his head in there, I believe, or someone else did, and there was no one in the next room. We asked everyone because they all had different types of technology. I asked them to turn everything off,
Mhm.
and sure enough, for about 10 minutes, I was asking various questions, and we were getting these brief, raspy answers. And
That you
we
could hear in real time.
everyone could hear it, yes.
Okay.
You know, and excuse me. So we're looking at the 15 people in front of me. None of them, you know, you could tell when someone's doing ventriloquism. You know, you can see the little bit of movements that wasn't
Sure.
happening. But the voice seemed to be coming off to my side where there was no one. And me and Barry are like, oh my God, but you know, we've been doing it long enough that we've seen things, but you don't typically get that to
Yeah.
that extent. So basically what we learned is, you know, the answers were so short and raspy, but it basically seemed to be it was someone who had lived in the area but wasn't attached to the building. And I was still really skeptical about it at first. After the class was over, you know, we had a rotation break and I was trying to science the heck out of it in the room, couldn't
Mhm.
find any cause. There was most of the electricity had been turned off. We were running off of basically flashlights and lanterns. I couldn't find speakers, old wiring, anything. I couldn't tell you the name of the person that, the entity we were speaking with. I'm sorry, it's been so long, and I do have a bit of a
Oh, you're
memory,
you're fine.
a bit of a memory disorder from my learning disability. So I don't remember the name, but I remember going home the next day, and then the day after that, I was hanging out with a friend of mine named Sandra. Really intuitive, nice young lady. We still keep in contact, actually. But we were just catching up. I was walking around her outside of her yard with her. I hadn't been to her house before, so she was giving me the grand tour of the property. Beautiful place. And she's like, "Who's so and so?" And I look at her. I says, "Have you been playing around on the internet?" And she goes, "What do you mean?" She goes, "This is just some energy that I'm sensing on you." And I was like, were there any reviews of this event that I did online?" And she goes, "No, what are you talking about?" And I trusted her that she didn't see
Sure.
anything. This person I had known for some time, and she never gave me a reason to believe not believe her.
Mhm.
So she goes, "Well, this energy is with you. I can't say it's conscious, but it's with you." And the name she had given me was some off weird name, which was the name of the entity that Barry and I were speaking with
Mhm.
back 2 states, about 8 hours away. So that solidified it quite a bit for me, that this person who didn't even know I was at this event. I didn't tell her anything about it. I didn't commonly
Sure.
go around speaking about what I did. It's a little more accepted now, but this was when the TV shows were first starting to catch on, and
Mhm.
most people would think you're nuts. There was a stigma.
There was.
So I never talked about it, with anyone. So when she came up with this name, I was like, huh. So I was on another show recently, and Barry was on there, and this story came up, and he's like, he's all acknowledging everything that happened, so I didn't sound like I was nuts. He was there, and there were 15 people in that room, and it's like some of them had voice recorders, and I'm sure one or two of them left it on. And back then, I was even more skeptical than I am now, so I never recorded anything back then, and I'm
Mhm.
kicking myself because I would have loved to have this recorded.
Yes.
So now it's just a story. Yes, I have Barry Fitzgerald to say, yes, it happened, and he's reputable, but it's still a story. We have no way of proving it other than the
Mhm.
15 people who were in that room with us, who we have no idea how to get a hold of them. It was a one-off weekend, one of many. But that's one of the few times where I would be willing to say there was something there that I could not
Okay.
prove with science.
That's cool. And because of your scientific background, you had a hard time admitting to yourself there was something here.
It's funny because, it's been many years and that hamster's still running on the wheel, trying to figure out some scientific reason. But I'll tell you, I spent an ample amount of time going through that room looking for any type of old technology that might have been embedded in the walls,
Mhm.
using a FLIR camera to see if there was anything hot in there, any type of active electrical, um, any type of piping, because piping can cause sounds to carry great distances and actually amplify them.
Yes.
Nothing. This was just a secluded room, nothing but wood walls, and we're not talking about, like, creaking noises. Wood can make funny noises. These were clear spoken words, and it was not coming from the people in front of me. It was off to the side where there was absolutely no one. I mean, I remember people in that room, the couple ran out scared. Couple were sitting there like a deer in headlights, and I'm sure I was too, because being the skeptical person, I was having trouble accepting it in the moment, but I wasn't gonna let it go, so I still tried to keep a conversation going. But, it's been all these years, and I'm willing to admit there was something there that I can't explain. But the science part of me is still trying to figure it out. And it's been all these years. You know what? I've done a lot more research over the years into sciences,
Right.
and I can't come up with one for this one. Like, it just, I can't. I'm willing to say that there was something paranormal there. And I'll be honest, I don't do that very often.
That's pretty incredible, though.
Yeah.
That's wild. So, what else has happened to you that you could prove? Give us a really good one that you proved was not a ghost.
Oh, God.
I know there's been so many. I can get that.
Yeah. Okay, here's another one. And it would be something that a typical investigator who kept an open mind could figure out. So I get contacted by this older lady and her son. The son lived out of state and would come to visit every now and again, but like several
Mhm.
times a year, he'd make the trip and spend the weekend to visit his mother. So when he came over, they would start smelling something that reminded them of his dead father, the lady's husband.
Okay.
But it would only happen when the son came over. So they had called a ghost hunting team who came in and basically convinced them that this gentleman was coming to visit them, without doing any real scientific investigation. Um, so I didn't actually go into the place. It was another phone consultation, and I just asked a bunch of questions. And it turns out this would happen when the son was sitting in his father's old chair. Now, the woman would sit in the chair often, but it didn't happen. So I asked some personal questions, and this older woman was probably no more than 90 pounds soaking wet, sweet little old lady. But her son was a big boy,
Mhm.
you know, almost 300 pounds. So I got to thinking, if he is sitting in this chair, it is very possible he was releasing trapped air caught in the middle of the cushion.
With, yeah, deodorant or cologne or anything.
Smells can be trapped and air molecules can be trapped for great periods of time and released little by little. So you would think when he sat down on this cushion, all the air would be released, but no, just little bits and pockets were being released over time anytime he sat in it. So I suggested that what was happening is when her larger son was sitting in the chair, that air molecules trapped in the cushioning were being released, and those air molecules consisted of the scent of his father, who had sat in that chair thousands of times over the years. Um, they weren't willing to accept that. They were very religious and needed emotionally to believe that th- this gentleman was coming to visit them.
Okay.
They did call in another group, because they didn't like my opinion. Didn't tell them about anything I said, and this group was a little more scientific, and they pretty much came to the same conclusion that I came
Mhm.
to of this is what was happening. It was the only thing that we could think of, and it's quite obvious that's probably what was happening. Some of these old chairs made today, you're lucky if they last 5 years, but
Yes.
back when you were younger and when I was younger, I'm
Mm.
older than I look. I was born in the 70s. Things are made to last. I mean, you could still have refrigerators from back then that still work.
Absolutely.
Furniture that's still in great condition. It's not made to fall apart after a couple of years like it is
Mhm.
now. So basically, I wholeheartedly believe that's exactly what was happening. This heavy set gentleman
Okay.
was sitting in the chair. Um, if you, I'm thinking of another quick one.
Mm.
I know we're getting a little low on time here. I have a little list of notes here, of my various stories. Let's see here.
Well, you've done a
Um,
lot, so I think it's
yeah.
pretty cool, and I'm sure you've helped a lot of people if they are willing to accept it.
Oh, definitely. I have another cool one actually, and I'll
Mm.
keep it very short because I can see we're running low on time here. So I got contacted by this woman who was having I'm sure you've heard of hypnopompic and hypnagogic hallucinations. It's where your mind starts um, almost hallucinating when you're at that point of just waking up or just falling asleep, when it's kind
Yes.
of in between and you start misinterpreting things. That's where you can, you felt, you often hear people say, I was being held down. I woke up, I was being held down. I was being choked. Typically that's, a hallucination. Your body relaxes itself when you're sleeping. And if
Mhm.
you start to become somewhat conscious, you're not being held down. You're just somewhat paralyzed by your own body. But anyway, she started having what she believed to be waking dreams of a young boy. And there's something called cryptodementia. It's basically what I was describing earlier, forgotten memory.
Okay.
But so she was, these were too vivid. The images she was telling me were too vivid. Sometimes you
Mhm.
can have vivid dreams due to medication, but she wasn't on anything. So I suggested that she goes in for hypnosis for memory regression. And to make a long story short, She through this memory regression, she learned that when she was really young, she had a brother. Um, and then she went and did some research, and sure enough, her mother had a son that was a little older than her and had given him up for adoption due to financial needs.
Okay.
She was a single mom and struggling. So a ghost hunting team had told this lady, it was someone it was a paranormal entity coming to visit her. And it turned out it was a forgotten memory. It was cryptomancia. She did some research, and like I said, she found out that she did have a younger brother that was given up,
Mhm.
many, many years ago. And she was able to track down some relatives who had pictures. And it turns out that the picture was the young boy she was seeing. Unfortunately, the guy had died, so she wasn't able to reunite with him. But it basically changed her life to know that she had this long lost brother, and explain this reoccurring,
Yeah.
um, waking dream that she had been having.
But the dream was not paranormal based. It was an old memory coming to the front.
Yeah, yep, exactly.
All
Cryptomancia
right.
is it's literally a forgotten memory. It seems like it's something new, and it often in our field gets perceived as paranormal activity because it's
Mhm.
so vivid. Because it's so vivid, you think you're seeing things or sensing things, and it's really just a forgotten memory.
Okay. Eric, you've got a podcast where you go much deeper into the scientific side of paranormal investigation. How can people find that?
Okay, it's called the Mount Washington Valley Spirit Podcast. Not very unique. I probably could have come up with something more spooky, but I wanted to keep it simple,
And
you
scientific.
and scientific. You can find it pretty much on any podcast aggregator, from Apple Podcasts to Google Podcasts, any podcast network. It's on there. I also upload it to YouTube, and archive.org.
Mhm.
But if you go to mwvspirit.com, you'll see a link on there for podcasts, and it has links to pretty much all the major locations where I have it. And
Okay.
I actually, for hearing impaired, I type it all out as well, which takes a long time to do. But I load that under a blog, so you can actually read my podcast too.
Okay, and that is your website behind your head there, mwvspirit.com.
Behind the old Chrome Dome.
Hey, we got the same barber. What can I say? So,
Exactly.
and people can email you if they have issues that they want to run by you that maybe they are hoping is got a scientific base to it.
Yep, that email address right there. Geez, this reversal. Info at mwvspirit.com. But you can also find me on pretty much any major social media platform at mwvspirit.
All right. Well, Eric Extreme, Mount Washington Valley Spirit, and you are incredible. I love the way you talk about it because, as you said, it used to be one out of 3 or 4 episodes had a ghost, and now everything is. And it's good to get back to reality.
Yeah, I'm hoping, people like me, and us who take a more scientific stance, get the word
Mhm.
out, kind of re-educate the field that, this hysterics,
Oh, good
the
word.
the TV versions is not reality. That's cinematic, and I'd like to see some of us help this field get back to its roots where it used to be up
Mhm.
until these TV shows came out.
And it's good. It's okay to not be haunted.
It's for a lot of people, it's just, science isn't as fun as the spooky. And my
That's
saying
true.
always is science comes before the spooky. And to me personally, I love science as much as I love the spooky. So
Mhm.
the term often uses debunking. Explaining something with science for me is as fun as not being able to explain it. I know
Right.
it's not the same for everyone, but I'm hoping that, people at least find some common ground in the middle where they do some of the science without having to give up the entertainment of the spooky.
It may not take much. Eric Extreme, thanks for coming in. You have a Merry Christmas. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. You too.
Take care. All right, my friends, Ghosts and Grinches, our show is just about over. I do want to say one more time Merry Christmas, have a Happy New Year, and most important of all, stay spooked. Good night.